Welcome to the Journey Home program. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this special edition of Journey Home. The Journey Home, we're joking round table, even though we got a nice long square table, but rectangle table. But I'm here in England in our second EWTN trip to England to film converts and reverts to the Catholic Church. We've had a wonderful time here as we film here in the Brompton Oratory. And I've invited back three of the guests that we've already taped your journeys, but as we do in the roundtable, I invite back former guests to discuss a particular issue that is of interest to the guest and also connected with their own journeys. And the issue that we've looked at today is an extremely important one, and that's the new evangelization, our call to share what we've received, and that's our wonderful, the fullness of our faith with others. We can't grasp it and hold on to it. We must share it with others, or we're not appreciating it the way we ought to, the way we ourselves have been given it by grace, and usually, almost always somehow, through the witness of another person. And of course, EWTN is committed to that, and it's a great pleasure to join the three of you here in England. And maybe we'll focus a bit on the new evangelization in England specifically, which is, I think it's something that's needed here, is that right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. As it is everywhere. But again, we have Monsignor Keith Baltrop. Thank you very much for joining us, Father Keith. And Jeremy DeSace, thank you for joining us. And Sister Mary of the Trinity, thank you for joining us again.
Okay.
What I usually do in the roundtables is we presume it's possible that our guests may not have seen the other episode in which you shared in more detail your journey. So why don't we begin by asking you to give a 5 or 10 minute summary of your journey back into the church. And if I could, Sister Mary, let's begin with you.
Okay, well, I was an Anglican as a child, and quite faithful actually, probably because I went to an Anglican school. My dream, my deep desire to be a missionary began when I was 5 years old.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah.
I just knew I was going to be a missionary. And of course, nobody in my family thought that was a good idea. Most of my family were totally indifferent to God. I didn't practice any faith at all of them, except for one auntie. And so I had no encouragement, and my father used to say, forget those stupid ideas, because what the world needs now is not missionaries. You're going to go into finance, you're going to go into something that we need in the world. But I would always answer, no, Daddy, I'm going to be a missionary. And I was inspired by an African missionary who came to our church, and because I went to church from 5 years old by myself. Nobody would go with me. And sad to say, at 13 years old, I had an experience really of, I think, the evil one. But in one moment, I lost my faith totally. I became cynical. I believed that what my father and everybody said was true. There was no God, and I'd wasted my time. From now on, I'll never go to church, I'll never pray again as long as I live, and that's the end of that. And from 13 years old on, if you lose God, you begin to unravel, and you start unraveling more and more. So by the time I was studying history at the London University, and got into a hippie community, and you know what that would lead to, drugs and the whole immorality, and they were drug dealers. So it went, although I never dealt drugs myself, but the people I was with did. And even though part of me was shocked and horrified sometimes to see such young people coming already hooked on heroin or whatever, but I just had no foundation really to resist the pull, and I wanted to belong and to belong to the group, and went along with them, experienced a lot of violence and hatred. I joined this group because they were like the flower power people, and they said drugs mellowed them, drugs made them more loving, and I sort of fell for it. But my experience was that, no, it was destroying my life and destroying a lot of people. And I never experienced so much violence as I did at that time. We would have Arabs with sawn-off shotguns coming in, bursting in to get their stash, and street people, Hell's Angels. There were battles of skinheads in those days. We didn't have the punks, skinheads and so forth, and battling the hippies. And anyway, thanks be to God, I had an experience that sort of turned me around. I my friends and I, we were going to go to India to buy hashish, sell it.
God uses amazing things.
Yeah, and then, well, amazingly foolish. And although I was having my doubts about this, I decided, well, I can travel. Went home with my boyfriend, who was actually the leader of the group, and tried, of course, not telling my father what we were going to India for. I was just saying, I want to travel. And my father kept resisting and said, no, you finish your studies before you travel. And the more he insisted, the more I resisted. Until finally one day he called up and said, I don't have all the answers to life. If you really think this will make you happy, if you really think this is what you should be doing with your life right now, do it. And as he said that, I knew deep in my gut level that I really didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go. But being attached to the group, and especially to my boyfriend, I went along, a bit like a mindless zombie really, followed them, went to Edinburgh, they were mostly Scottish, and my eyes were opened. I saw the reality. I mean, their mother was dying of cancer, they had no compassion whatsoever. They were going to have a big party while she was in agony in her bedroom, and my friends were going to have this big bash and all the dope you could have in the world, and beer and whiskey, and have a big party before they set off for India. And I heard them making a plan to kill somebody. And I just, it was a point of awakening for me, and I just said to myself, what have I got myself in for? No, this is insane. I can't go forward with this anymore. And they went off to get more beer and stuff as if they needed it. And sitting in front of me was a big bag of all the drugs. There were amphetamines and mandrax and LSD, mescaline, anything you could want was in that bag, and they were going to share this at the party. And as I looked at this, I thought, well, this, I've seen what this can do. Drink's bad enough, but this, people changed personalities totally. They could kill somebody with this. So with this, I had a new sense of courage, a great sense of conviction that just came over me. Went into the bathroom, flushed the whole lot down the toilet bit by bit. And I sat there and I thought, they might kill me for this. I mean, that was a lot of money besides the fun. But I felt no fear whatsoever. And of course they came back and, where's the stash, where's the stash? And I said, well, it's no use looking, it's gone. And I was grabbed by the throat, and they were going to box me up, I think, and said, what do you mean? And I just looked at them and said, you can do whatever you want to me. I honestly don't care. You know, you have lied to me. You told me drugs make you mellow, they make you loving. I've never seen so much hatred, violence, backstabbing in my whole life. You don't even care that your mother's dying. And I said, I'm sorry, I will never take another drug as long as I live. I am not going to India. I don't know what there is in life, but there has to be more than this. And if you want to kill me, go right ahead, because honestly, I don't care at this moment. And of course, they didn't kill me, they just sort of deflated, and some of them said, we're coming if you leave. And so I went back to Manchester, where I'm from. And I have to say, it's a great depressed time of my life. I felt, what's worth living for? I'd already decided, my father really was into money makes you happy. And I didn't believe it. And I said, I don't want my dad's lifestyle. And I don't want what the hippies have offered either. So what else is there? And what am I going to do? And I wasn't suicidal, but there was a big truck coming as I got off the bus, and I slowed down deliberately, thinking the best thing that could happen to me is I could be run over at this point. But I wasn't. And anyway, I'm sorry, I'm going to go over my 5 minute. To cut a long story short, I had 2 weeks of, I would say, hell, really. I didn't dare tell my parents what was going on with me, and I just found that I became sort of almost possessed by a great fear. And at night, when I would try to sleep, it was as if I was falling into a big black chasm that was going to swallow me up. And I was very scared, and I thought, well, maybe I've done my mind in with the drugs or something, and who can I tell? If I go to our doctor, he's our family doctor, he'll report to my parents. At that Christmas Eve, although it didn't click at the time that it was Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, I was trying to watch a late night movie to stay awake, drink coffee, and I heard a voice. And the voice said to me, it was a very kind voice, and I don't know how to describe it to people. It was inside of me and outside of me at the same time. And this voice said, "You're very frightened, aren't you?" I said, "Well, yeah, I think I might be losing my mind or something." And the voice said, "There's goodness, truth, and beauty in this life for those who want to seek it. Do you want to seek it?" And of course, I said, "Well, yes, I want it. If it's there, I want it." And I was given then very strict instructions: go back to London, re-enter your college, which unknown to my father I'd left, but now your life will be a journey for truth, and you will find it. And one day you will be happy, you'll be free. And I did, and anyway, it's a long journey. I went back to London. I got very interested in Asian cultures and Asian religions. I didn't see truth as Jesus or Christianity. In fact, I hated Christianity at this point in my life. And so I didn't pursue that, but I would go into Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, many isms. And, but the strange part was Jesus, he just kept coming into the picture in the most unlikely ways, and I kept pushing him away. I met a friend from America. This is where I ended up in America, the United States. And he was on a journey for truth. He'd had an experience in California, as he was an architect, and told to go to England. And we met and we decided to search together. And then he went back, and long story, I got a voice that one day said, "You are to go to the United States." And I went, and my friend and I were staying with his mother in Oregon, and we were searching. We actually got married, but right after getting married, we became totally celibate. And it was nothing to do with Christianity, it was to do with Hinduism. We were really deeply into the Hindu thing, and we decided that if we wanted to be spiritually grow, it was better to be celibate. And we hated Christ, and then he kept popping up in so many ways that finally we just said, okay, so Jesus is a good man. Okay, so he did good things, but who cares? We prefer Buddha and Krishna, forget Jesus. And then Christmas Eve again in Oregon, my friend's mother was a fallen away Episcopalian. She had not been to church for 40 years. And so all the more it's providential that on Christmas Eve she came to me and she said, "Would you like to read this? I think you should read it." And I saw this book coming, and I could see Jesus on the cross, and all my rebellion was rising up inside me. I said, "Oh, not him again." But politely I smiled, took the book to my room, and I was going to chuck it across the room because I just felt angry with Christ and Christianity, and I just was going to throw it across the room. And this inner voice spoke again. And by now, my friend and I, we had our own philosophy of life, that we didn't believe in a God, but we believed in a cosmic force that controlled the universe, that was intelligent, and that if you sought the truth, you would be guided, and everything would teach you something of the truth. And so this voice said, giving us our own words back, "You said that when you search for truth, everything and every person and every experience that comes into your life is to teach you something of that truth. How come it's true for you about everything and everybody except Jesus Christ?" And as I was like this with the book, and I thought, wow, that's true. Jesus is the only one that we just put complete wall. We don't want him. And I thought, so grudgingly I said, well, okay, I'll read this book. Well, it was The Life of Jesus Christ by Bishop Fulton J. Sheen. And I never read the book at that time because I never got past the first sort of preface thing. And you know Bishop Sheen and how he speaks, but his little introduction said, "Modern man believes that he is the most completely logical being that ever stayed on planet Earth." He said, "But I'd like to say he's the most illogical. For instance, he says, modern man says, Jesus Christ is a good man, just a good man, like any other good man. He said, but I say, either you take him to be who he claims to be, the Son of the living God, and if he's not that which he claims to be, then logically we must conclude probably one of two things. Either he's the greatest charlatan, liar, and deceiver the world has ever known, or he is the most deluded, crazy person the world has ever known. In either case, not to be classed as just a good man. So he said, get off the fence. Take Jesus or leave him. And of course, that's where we were at. We were on that fence. Well, okay, he's a good man, but who cares? There's a lot of other good men. And I made a decision that night. I guess I'm an impulsive person. I said, okay, to my friend, I'm going to give, quite arrogantly, I'm going to give Christianity one chance. I'm going to read the Bible from cover to cover. And then, I even said these words, and then I'll throw it away forever, because I was so convinced that that's what I would do. And I did. We joined VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, assigned to Kansas City, Missouri, to work in the inner city. And we read the Bible every night. We just come home and read and read and read the Bible, and I didn't throw it away. And thanks be to God for me, I was just given the gift of faith when I read the prologue of John's Gospel. You know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And as soon as I read that, I knew he was the Son of God, and we decided, well, this is it, we have to become Christians. Searched many churches, and I actually never thought of the Catholic Church, even though by this time I was working with the Christian Brothers of De La Salle in a special school. And it was December 8th, 1975, Feast of the Immaculate Conception, in the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Kansas City. One of the brothers had his 25th anniversary and invited the staff. And as I walked in the back of the church, I'd never been in a Catholic church before. And everybody, it was full. We just knelt at the back. They were praying something, we were trying to listen. It was a rosary. And I don't know, it's one of the greatest moments of my life, really, to me. At that moment, just filled from head to foot, throughout the whole of my inner being, filled with the absolute, total certainty that I belonged in a church. I had come home, and that was the exact feeling.
All right.
And
Thank
that
you,
was
sister.
how I came.
Thank you very much. Jeremy.
Well, I wish I could say that my story was quite as dramatic as that, but it's not.
God works in each of us differently.
Well,
right?
indeed, indeed. I was brought up in an Anglican family, and we were very conscious that as a French family of origin, that we had lost our faith somewhere in the middle of the 19th century through various advantageous marriages with English money. From my French ancestors. Several of my ancestors married English heiresses, and the faith went. But my father was a well-known Anglican theologian and clergyman, so I was brought up very much within a church environment, within a cathedral environment. I was a cathedral chorister, so I had a great love of church music. And through my father's work, he was also, being half French and a French speaker, he was involved in ecumenical dialogue long before the Second Vatican Council, particularly in Europe, when he was speaking to and discussing at conferences with Roman Catholic theologians in French-speaking Europe. And so we had a lot of Catholic friends. And as a family, we were very conscious that we were sort of Anglican, almost sort of by mistake. And in fact, my father was very keen to become a Roman Catholic, but sadly died before he eventually did that. And I was sent away to a boarding school in the south of England, when we lived in the north of England, which is a very evangelical school. It was very Protestant. It had a great sort of Protestant ethos about it. And God moves in mysterious ways. I hated that school. It was, to me, 3 years of sheer purgatory, if not worse. And my mother had just died as well, which didn't make matters worse. So at the age of 16, I took some time out from my school work, and I went to study French in France for a few months before resuming my education afterwards. And it was really in France that I had this tremendous feeling that Catholicism was the answer. I saw within the Church of England, sort of, you know, the evangelical side. I saw the Anglo-Catholic side, the Catholic side, and for me, it was really quite clear that one had to be one or the other. And unlike Cardinal Newman, for example, I didn't really seek to create a kind of a Catholic church within the Anglican Church. I couldn't see that as being valid. For me, if I had to be a Catholic, it had to be Roman Catholic. I was reacting strongly against sort of my sort of Protestant evangelical education at this particular school. And when I was first in France, I did go to the Église réformée, the Protestant church, which I found deeply uninspiring, and instead found myself walking 2 miles to the Catholic church, where the priest was extremely kind to me, knew that I was an Anglican, but very much welcomed me into the church. And in fact, that summer I went back and worked in a French holiday camp for children, rather like your Camp America, but a Catholic holiday camp organized by this particular parish in Arcachon, near Bordeaux. And this was down in their holiday camp was down in the Pyrenees, very near to Lourdes. And so I had an interesting experience, age 16, of taking, as an Anglican, of taking French children, not some of whom weren't that much younger than me, maybe just 2 or 3 years younger than me, to pilgrimage to Lourdes. And that was a great, it sort of had a great effect upon me. I loved the devotional aspect of Catholicism as well as the liturgical side of it. And I suppose it then took me about 2 years. I went back to England to continue my studies. I then I joined the wine trade and worked as well. And then eventually I realized that I had to be a Catholic, and it was just a matter of time before I did so, which is nearly 30 years ago now, so it's quite some time. And at the time I became a Catholic, I probably should have looked into it with greater depth, but I had a great desire to be a Catholic, and I did so in what is in England considered to be a great beacon of modern Catholicism, which is Clifton Cathedral in Bristol, which had then only been built 5 years, so it was a brand new cathedral, and it seemed to be a great icon of sort of up-to-date Catholicism, which I very much respected. And so that's where I was received into the church.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Father Keith.
Well, I'm the odd one out, I think, in that I didn't grow up in the national church here, the Church of England. I grew up as a Baptist. Now, I should probably say for your American viewers that Baptists in England are probably somewhat different to, say, Southern Baptists in America. But it was quite a close, very loving community, quite conservative, almost fundamentalist. And I went to a school as a teenager which had started as a school for the sons of Baptists and nonconformist missionaries. I mean, I wasn't in that category. I went as a day boy, but so I had a very Baptist grounding. I actually grew up, I think I'm an only child. My parents were very convinced Christians. And I think the last church that they would ever have wanted me to join was the Catholic Church. So I'll come to that later, but it was very painful for them, and I did become one. But so I grew up, I think, very much with the feeling that the Catholic Church was pretty much the Scarlet Woman of the apocalypse, you know, pretty much as far away as you could go from the real thing. It wasn't said too explicitly, but that was there. The only experience I had as a child, perhaps a little bit like the experience Sister Mary narrated, slightly older, about 7 or 8. Obviously, I didn't go to a Catholic school, it was a state school. And we had a lesson on monks, as children do, no doubt. I'd never heard of monks before. And at the end of the lesson, the teacher, for whatever reason, said to us, now, anybody here think they'd like to become a monk when they grow up? And it was one of those weird experiences without quite knowing what was happening. I found my hand was going up. Almost to the extent of, where did that come from? I think maybe my grandfather was rather bald on top and looked rather tonsured, so maybe I thought that he was a monk. But so obviously I wasn't baptized as a baby, because Baptists, as you know, believe in baptism later. I made a commitment to Christ at about the age of 8 or 9. I gave my life to Christ, as a good Baptist would do. And then about the age of 14, I was eligible for baptism. The deacons of the church came round to my house, 2 of them very solemnly interviewed me. Did I have a personal faith in Christ? Had I given my life to him? And I said, yes, I have. And obviously convinced them, because I was baptized at the age of 14 by total immersion, an experience that I can remember and savor. I'm delighted, unlike so many of us, I can actually remember my baptism, and it was a great moment. But then something happened that appeared very strange at the time. I didn't get into drugs like Sister Mary, but it was kind of dramatic, and in a different sort of way. I lost my faith, not in the sense of being convinced that God didn't exist, but experiencing in myself just a severe doubt. It was like the sort of foundation completely collapsed. I actually believe, looking back and knowing what I know now, I actually think that was part of the grace of baptism. If you like, I can now see that I was beginning to question, beginning to use the God-given gift of reason, which I have to say wasn't terribly much favored in the Baptist church I grew up in, to question. But at the time, it was a very painful experience. I used to read a lot, talk to people, go into libraries, talk to the pastor, talk to my mother. She said, "Oh, don't worry, dear, it's the devil. Forget it, it'll go away." Well, of course it didn't. But no intellectual searching gave me the answer. And yet I clearly wanted to believe. I knew that the Christian life was there in the Christian community. So I went through the rest of my school years in a kind of very painful state of being torn between wanting to believe but not being able to. I still continued going to church. It wasn't until I left school and left home and went to university, I went to Oxford to study classics, that I suppose psychologically began to get the freedom to search. And to cut a long story short, I searched around a lot of different churches. It got worse, but one day I had this experience, not exactly a voice, but a very clear sense came to me, and I can still remember the place where it happened. In the Catholic Church, you will find what you're looking for. And it was confirmed a few weeks later when I went into Westminster Cathedral, not far from here, and was overwhelmed by the sense of the holiness of the place, and a kind of a sense that somewhere there would be a place for me. I took instruction at Oxford and became a Catholic. I'm now a priest, and rather ironically, I'm actually working in the field of evangelization, which is what Baptists are supposed to be good at. So in a way, I've kind of come full circle.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to deal with this issue of the new evangelization. See you in a little bit. Welcome back to The Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. I'm here in England, and our guests are Sister Mary of the Trinity and Jeremy Desace, and Monsignor Keith Boltrup. I got that right? I want to make sure I pronounced it right. So Father Keith and Jeremy and Sister, thank you very much for sharing your stories, and I'm glad you shared them in detail enough to recognize as we look at the topic of the new evangelization. I'd like to begin, we heard a bit of your story. Let's begin by asking you, at what place in your journey was Catholic evangelization?
Well, from my point of view, it wasn't at all, because I decided I wanted to be a Catholic. So apart from, I suppose, knowing almost passively by knowing people who were Catholics and who inspired me, but there was no direct, nobody came and told me to be Catholic or tried to persuade me to be Catholic.
So your journey wasn't influenced in any obvious way by the outreach of the church?
No outreach was involved at all, no.
I would say it's the same for me. I only having made the decision to be a Catholic, that then there was some movement of people inviting me to meetings or prayer meetings or catechetical meetings. But in fact, I would actually say not only was there not any evangelization outreach, but when we first approached the cathedral parish of Kansas City, Missouri, and we went to the rectory, and as we went there, the secretary, when she looked at us, because we believed in simplicity of life and we lived with the poor, and she sort of mustn't have, we were clean, I don't know, she didn't like what she saw, and she said, "What do you want?" And we said, "Well, we'd like to see a priest." "What for?" And she was very unfriendly, and we said, "Well, it's kind of personal." She finally let us in, but worse was to follow, because as we sat there, the priest came in and he also looked us up and down. He said, what do you want?" There was no sense of welcome or greeting. And we said, "Well, Father, we're interested in becoming Catholics." And not only did he not jump at the chance, we thought we're lost sheep. Somebody must want us. But no, he said, "Well, what religion are you?" And we said, "Well, I'm nothing." I said, "I was an Anglican, but I've been nothing for 10 years. And the same with my friend." And I said, "But I was an Anglican." He caught that, and he said, he looked at his watch and he said, "I'm really a very busy man. The Anglican Cathedral is down the road. You can go there."
That's shocking.
So it was actually not even, it was almost like a negative thing. And we met that a lot, of people, fallen away Catholics who hated the church and tried to discourage us. There was very, very little encouragement of anybody reaching out and saying, "Wow, this is great, let's bring this person, let's relate to them, let's teach them about our faith." Nothing, no, the opposite.
Wow.
Very much the same for me. I mean, I knew several Catholics at Oxford, very nice people, but it was almost like they would studiously avoid anything like encouraging you to become a Catholic. I have to say, the chaplaincy where I became a Catholic was well known for receiving a lot of people into the church. So in that sense, there was a kind of a culture that, okay, this was a place where lots of people became Catholics, but you were supposed to make the first move.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's kind of amazing when I think the negative, and I could throw my own story in, but I won't just because of time, because it's the same way. I went 40 years before anyone approached me about the Catholic Church. What happened? I mean, Christ in Matthew 28 says, "Go ye therefore." He didn't say, "Go ye therefore and make committees." Go ye therefore and make disciples. So the command to evangelization was there. We know that it was there because the church spread somehow. But in our generations, what's your thoughts? What has happened to the evangelization?
One of the thoughts I have about, well, let's say if we're centering a little bit on the English situation a little bit, I really feel part of it is to do with the historical development of the faith in this country and having had the Reformation. And I would say my experience coming back now after 30 years away and living and working among the people here is, after living in the Philippines for 20 years, which is a very Catholic country, Catholic milieu, and then you come back and I just feel that people here, it's almost like a siege mentality. It's like they've had to just lie low for 300 years.
It's almost still a recusant.
Yeah, it's like, we don't make waves, don't be obvious. Try to just blend in and be sort of a little bit, laid back and indifferent, and don't push. I mean, I honestly feel that that's part of it. I don't think it's a simple answer, but I think that's part of it.
I would agree with that. We've been, as it were, a quiet minority religion, although ironically, in terms of practicing their faith, we're probably the biggest religion in England now. I believe that more Catholics go to Mass every Sunday than Anglicans go to church, partly because we have an obligation to do so. But the church is essentially people's faith, Catholic faith in this country. It's a very private affair for most people. And it's for cultural reasons and historical reasons. And actually to get people to do more than the basic minimum of going to Mass on a Sunday and on a holy day of obligation is extremely difficult. And it's only in particularly dynamic parishes and situations where that particular model is any different. And I think really, maybe it's partly our British Reserve, our English Reserve as well, might well come into it. But until 1850, before the restoration of the hierarchy, Catholicism was very quiet and just
So that's almost
hushed tones.
200 years, right? Pretty much 200 years up until that
Yes.
point, where you pretty much had to keep your Catholicism to yourself, not
Almost 300, actually.
But I think what happened then when the Catholic Church revived in this country through legal relief and also through large-scale Irish immigration,
Yes.
what happened was that a whole network of institutions was set up for those people, schools, social clubs, same kind of things that you'd have in the United States, parishes obviously, and all sorts of clubs within the parishes. The purpose of which was to retain those Catholics as loyal Catholics in this sort of Protestant world. The mentality, therefore, was, very much one of encouraging Catholics to keep the faith. That was very much what men would say to each other in the Catholic social clubs when they went home after a drink. Goodbye, keep the faith. I've actually heard people say that when I was an assistant priest. Now, it's ironic, isn't it? Because we're now talking about sharing the faith. They were never told to share the faith. We had the prayer for the conversion of England at the end of benediction. England would one day come back to the Catholic Church, but there was no plan for how that would happen apart from prayer, which obviously is the most important. Then as things began to open up, of course, and the church began to talk about evangelization, the church also discovered the ecumenical movement. Now, once the church commits itself to the journey, quite rightly, for unity with other churches, it becomes quite difficult to talk about the conversion of England. Or you have to
at
understand
least
what
in a
it
public
means.
way, right?
So that then has begun to undermine, I think, the confidence of Catholics in their faith or in their evangelistic
Yes,
endeavors.
ironically, it was before the restoration of the hierarchy that there was more of a sense of mission, actually, the English mission,
Yeah.
with priests, Jesuits and others coming over from continental Europe where they'd been trained, in great secrecy, saying Mass whenever they could, and promoting the faith actually in a much more alive way than you might say, no, Monsignor's right. It became a cultural thing. So you had your Irish immigrants in various parts of the United Kingdom, and they kept their communities, just as indeed is happening now with a great number of Polish immigrants and other Catholic immigrants coming in from other European countries. And there's almost a sense of almost like an identity of culture more than necessarily the faith that's keeping it.
Now, I was going to add that in my own journey of the faith, I remember learning about the Catholic Truth Society and some of the speakers that would, I don't know where they did that here in England. I mean, was that a phenomenon that lasted long, or did it have an impact?
In my case, it was very subtle. There was something called the Catholic Inquiry Centre, I think that was what it was called, and you wrote to them or rang them up and asked if they would send you what was then a series of 10 little booklets, very nicely written little booklets. This was in the mid-70s. And these arrived in anonymous brown envelopes with nothing marked on there, so that you could open them quietly and read. And then the next week you get the next one. And this went on for a series of 10, I seem to remember. Then it turned into 2 bigger books. But it was very subtle, but no sort of outreach.
I was thinking of Sheed and Ward.
Yes.
This is very interesting because we
published.
haven't talked before this, but the organisation I direct, the Catholic Agency to Support Evangelization, we actually run the Catholic Inquiry Office. We do still get a lot of inquiries by letter. We don't send things out under plain. Well, I suppose we do, but there isn't quite that secrecy. But of course, a lot of our inquiries now are by email.
Yes,
so I get emails every week from people saying, I've been thinking about becoming a Catholic for years. How do I do it? It's wonderful to get, and I'm delighted to share them.
I was going to say that I think part of the whole situation now that we're facing, we've talked about the historical and the cultural, but I think we also have to recognize, just as in many parts of the world, it's also the technological culture has come in and with its many advantages, but on the other hand, there's not that religious environment anywhere. There's not a faith environment in this country. I would even say 40, 50 years ago, there was more of a sense of being a Christian country. It's been lost. People are not, nobody's really interested. There's a vacuum. There's a spiritual vacuum here. And I think those people who continue to go to Mass sort of probably, I think, feel, and I work a lot with young people who use 2000, and that, you know, if I can just keep going what I have, I'm doing good. Because the attacks on Christianity in this country are very concerted. This political correctness, it is absolutely strangling, suffocating the church. And in some senses, I think we've made the mistake of falling in with it. And we need to stand up, I believe, stand up and move against this political correctness, not allow it to stifle us. Because I do experience here, I've just noticed things like you can listen to radio, TV, and frequently maybe Muslim or other religions are brought in to comment on things that are going on, rather now than a Christian or a Catholic or anybody. It's the whole, we're just being shunted to the side. And so I think that's another reason why people are even, they're kind of ashamed to stand up and be counted and say, yes, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian, and I'm, praise the Lord, and I'm for it, and I want everybody to be. They're just sort of allowing themselves to go down the stream.
You know, there's a scientific term called entropy, which is a word used to describe the second law of thermodynamics, that everything in nature moves from order to disorder, unless you throw energy into it to make order out of it. There's spiritual entropy. And that's why we need the new evangelization. Because without the new evangelization, the trajectory will be to disorder. And that's what's happened. A great spiritual writer, Father Gary Goulegrange, quotes, which was probably an old saying, in the ways of the spiritual life, in the ways of God, he who does not progress loses ground. And that's what we're seeing here. What do we do? In a practical way. I mean, this is your work, right, Father? I mean, what are some things that we can do for the new evangelization?
Well, I think first of all we have to, as it were, create a kind of a space whereby Catholics can see that evangelization is something they're called to do. So we have to promote the teaching of Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict on the need for a new evangelization. New, as Pope John Paul was always saying, new in its ardor, new in its methods, and new in its means of expression. But we have to show Catholics that it's not a sort of, quotes, Protestant thing to do. A lot of Catholics have put off the word evangelization because they think it's people going to Billy Graham rallies or handing out tracts on street corners. It can be that, but it can also be something profoundly sacramental, profoundly ecclesial. But also it's something done in everyday life. It's very simple. It's just a quiet word said at a bus stop, you know, let me say a prayer for you, or God bless you.
It's like what Sister referred to when she goes to a parish and the people that she encounters do not act like Christ. I mean, that's a very strong criticism, but that's the first, our first evangelization is people need to see Christ in us, right, Father? I mean, that's in your work, in anything. I've often felt the same way, and I felt the same way when I was a Protestant as well as a Catholic, as when I was a pastor. I made sure my secretary realized that very often you are the first Jesus that anyone will encounter when they call the church.
That's right.
Indeed.
Right.
I think another problem we do have, I have to say, is that ironically in the past, when there perhaps wasn't such talk about evangelization, people knew their faith and were confident in it. A lot of Catholics today are not terribly confident about what Catholic truth is, or they actually pick and choose bits of it. You know, it's been famously designated cafeteria Catholicism. I'm not blaming them. You know, maybe they haven't been shown the beauty, the splendor of truth. I know, which is EWTN's motto. You know, the splendor of how it all holds together. And if you lack that vision, then clearly you're not going to be very confident about speaking to others about it. You're thinking to yourself all the time, well, not sure if it's really the answer to people's problems. You know, John Paul II was fond of echoing all that teaching of the Vatican Council that Christ gives the answer to the problems of the human heart. It's not for religious people, it's for it's the answer to humanity's problems. And Catholics have got to I think, to be a bit more confident of that.
Well, his use of the word new didn't necessarily mean like new styles and new. It was people who have had the faith but lost it need to be re-evangelized.
That's what I was going to say. I think we have to start with, we have to be evangelized first. We have to be converted. There has to be a process where, I remember I was in the Philippines when they had their second plenary council of the whole church. I often wonder, would that be something that we could do here? You know, where the whole church comes together and priests and laity and religious and talks about our reality and where we're going to, so that we're all together. Because sometimes it's done hierarchically or in little meetings or committees, but we don't get we're not got the finger on the pulse of the ordinary Catholic and to bring them in. And they did in the Philippines. They had a huge plenary council. And they saw their reality and they said, we have to become the church of the poor in our country because of the poverty. It's been quite a triumphalistic church and the church of the wealthy and the poor so they've got to move to that. And they made plans, they made decisions. And one of the big things they said was, the first thing is the conversion of the evangelizers, you know, to become those witnesses, you know, we've got to convert ourselves. And then I believe encouraging people to, I've done street evangelization. We would go in groups from our parish in Brockley, and we went around London City 7 times. We ringed it. We would go as a group and with lay people, sisters, young people, and we would walk around the street and we'd always pray continuously. Some were praying the Rosary or the Divine Mercy Chaplet continuously, that the Spirit of God would move. And we would just say simply, the ones who would do the talking, would you like a picture of Jesus? Now it's very simplistic, but the idea was that the people are here in the middle of London, they have no idea, they've not any thought of God in their life at all. And they see everything, there's a whole image sort of surfeit of all kinds of images. So at least if we get them to see a picture of Jesus, to give him a thought, and we'd say, would you like a picture? Now the surprising thing is, of doing this and meeting thousands of people at the time when we did this over the weeks, very few refused. And some obviously weren't too interested, and they'd say, oh thanks, and put it in their pocket and dash off. But some people would stop and say, oh. And the ones who stopped, they got the full works. And I tell you, we had met a lot of lapsed Catholics and lapsed Christians who were deeply touched and said they were going to go back to their faith. And
you never know the person that 2 weeks later found the picture in their pocket, and you never know if the Spirit would use it.
Right.
You know, one thing I was going to ask you, Jeremy, is that you're very much on renewal of music.
Yes.
And do you see a place where that plays in the new evangelism?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a music publisher and singer myself. And part of what I do is to try and help improve the quality of church music, thereby enabling our liturgy to be more beautiful. And I think part of the problem, I have to say, is that liturgy has become rather banal and the music not at all good. And there's much less aspiration in the music than there was sort of 30, 40 years ago. And I work, but conversely, I work in a parish, which is perhaps unusually these days. I'm director of music at a parish in South London, which has doubled in size the last 10 years. And which takes evangelization extremely seriously, but not in a gimmicky sort of way, in all sorts of things, opportunities for people of different ages, lots of meetings, lots of guest speakers who come and speak to the youth, a youth worker who works in the parish, a careful attention to detail on music and liturgy, and trying to make the Mass as dignified as possible and with as good music as possible, with lots of plain song, lots of Latin, but not just for the sake of Latin, but lots of fine music, performed by and sung by people who are members of the parish, not by professionals. And it is extraordinary that this particular parish has doubled its Mass attendance every week. Every year. For the last 8 years, it has doubled its mass attendance.
You know, I was thinking that all of you, in a way, emphasize that people need to reappreciate their faith. I mean, if you think of it, we were salesmen and our job was to sell rakes, you know, well, if we didn't believe in the quality of those rakes, we would not sell them very enthusiastically. But if we believed they were the best rake, then we would stand in bold arrogance in it, you know, this is the best rake. But we need to recognize what great gift we've been given in Jesus Christ and His church. And I was thinking that that's what you do for a living, Father, is trying to awaken people to that.
Yeah.
And maybe, as you've all mentioned, we need to begin that new evangelization here. And maybe in a last thought, what could we say to our audience to help them re-evangelize themselves?
What I would want to say about evangelization, I'm glad you used the word faith. Pope Benedict, when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger, spoke in the Jubilee year about avoiding the temptation to think that evangelization means big things. Big, you know, you've got to have lots of money and lots of events. He said it's like the apostles. Jesus told them the parable of the sower. Go out and sow a few seeds. You've no idea what those seeds may germinate. But one thing we know for certain, if you don't sow the seeds, there won't be any harvest.
Like that picture in their pocket that they received of the face of Jesus. You never know in what way that's a seed. And I also believe in catechesis in the sense that I'm one that does not believe in this age-oriented catechesis in the reason that if I just wait until they're going to understand it, it might be too late. We need to plant the seeds so they're there.
We kind of lost the plot in the 70s about that, I think. And the new shortened edition to the Catechism is extremely good. That's
Oh, the wonderful compendium.
The compendium. But when the petty catechism sort of went, and there's a whole generation of people that don't really know the basic tenets of the faith at all.
Yeah, we get them inside of us. So it's kind of like our Lord Jesus, when He's fighting the devil in the desert, quotes the Scriptures. Well, how many of our people have learned the Scriptures, have them there so that they're there when they need them in prayer, need them for encouragement? Thank all three of you. Really appreciate your witness and coming home, but also giving us an encouragement on our need to be evangelizers as a part of the new evangelization. And thank you for joining us in this roundtable. God bless you. See you again soon.